I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the democracy for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, hopefully most of you caught the glaring error in my version of the Pledge of Allegiance. I said into the democracy for which it stands instead of into the republic for which it stands. Well, that raises the question, what is the difference? After all, we hear about the importance of democracy and that democracy is a good thing, that America is a democracy and that we want to see democracy in other parts of the world, and yet in our pledge we use the term republic. So are they the same or are they different? Is the U.S. a democracy or is it a republic? Well, to understand, we need to know the difference, and that means we got to go back to the beginning, and that is the first instances of democracy, at least in any large scale, and that occurred in ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, people would gather together, mostly men who had property, and they would make decisions on their behalf. That fundamentally is democracy, where people get to make decisions on their own behalf. Contrast that to other forms of government where someone else makes a decision and you have no say in the matter, like under a king or under a dictator, or under what's called an aristocracy where the elite govern and they may or may not care about what the people have to say or what they want. Those are other forms of government, contrast to a democracy. In a democracy, the people have the say, and that is the masses have a say. So majority rules is very important. But there are actually different forms of democracy. On the one hand, you have a form that's called direct democracy, and that really is the type of democracy that ancient Greece used. That's where the people vote and make decisions directly themselves. We actually have forms of direct democracy in some states and cities across the United States. An example would be when voters go to the polls and they see a proposal on the ballot that they can vote yes or no to. Because they are voting directly on the law, they are exercising direct democracy in those situations. So direct democracy is one form of democracy, but it is not the only form of democracy. There are also indirect forms of democracy, or what we often call Republican government. The idea of a republic has its origins in ancient Rome. Before Rome became an empire, it was called the Roman Republic. And in the Roman Republic, others would make decisions on your behalf, but you had input, usually, in those decisions. Well, that is a somewhat democratic regime because the people have some say, even if others are making decisions on their behalf. That is, in essence, a form of indirect democracy. And those are really the two primary types of democracy, though there are other variations. Direct democracy and indirect democracy. Direct democracy is where people vote on issues themselves. Indirect democracy, or what we will call Republican government, is where people elect others to make decisions on their behalf. But there are other distinctions between democracy and republicanism that are important to know, and the reason is because at the founding of our country, this was one of the debates, and our founding fathers clearly had a preference of one over the other. Founding fathers like James Madison criticized the idea of democracy, but what they were referring to was direct democracy, or what they would often call mobocracy. And that is the idea that all it takes is 50% plus one of voters to tell the others what to do and to make decisions. That concerned the founding fathers because one of the values they placed was in the idea of minority rights and individual rights. That is the idea that the majority isn't always right simply because it's the majority. So, whereas in an indirect democracy, the masses are important, in a Republican form of government, the individual also has some significance. Whereas in a direct democracy, the government is pretty much unbounded. It just acts as the people's will. In a Republican form of government, the government is usually limited by a document like the Constitution, as is the case in the United States. So that brings me back to my original question. Are we a democracy or are we a republic? Well, the truth is we are both. In the sense that people get some say in their decisions, or in most cases, a major say in their decisions, we are a democracy. But in the sense that we elect others to make those decisions on our behalf and we place a special value on minority rights in the individual, we are a republic. So we are a democratic republic, or to be even more precise, a constitutional democratic republic.